This happened a long time ago, right after the Great Patriotic War. I lived in the village of Akola, Pinezgi district. Times were hard. Entire villages died of starvation. Plus, every year, they also had to hand over their harvests to the collective farm, despite the fact that they themselves had nothing left. The extortions were outrageous, especially for our northern latitudes. You won't be able to grow the norm on a tiny plot of land, and to you, borrow from your neighbors, give the hut as collateral, but hand over what is due to the collective farm. And that's it. No matter how hard we tried to get out, nothing worked. We had to switch to pasture, grass, roots, mushrooms. No one even thought about stealing. They would immediately report it to whoever needed it, take it away, and remember what their name was. In the spring of 1947, I became completely hungry, and then the norm was raised. More people died in our village in 6 months than in the last 2. Many tried to move to other villages, but that was not the case. They were caught and taken to an unknown direction. Our father, Andre, perhaps one of all the village men, returned alive from the Patriotic War, and even then wounded. He had a strong limp on his right leg. He worked as a machine operator at MTS and part-time as a forester, and he got one of the most remote plots, 40 miles from our village. But somehow, you have to survive. Father realized, gathered all of us at a common table, and laid out his idea. It was mid-November. The collective farm work was coming to an end, and there wasn't much repairing of the machines at MTS. Almost all of them were working properly. Father decided to start collecting firewood for the winter, and at the same time, implement his plan. For half a month, he sat all day in the hut, repairing axes and saws, and also making new ones. One day, at the beginning of December, he took all 5 of us into the forest, to his plot. Having chosen a dry, flat place in the depths of the site, we began to prepare firewood. We worked all winter, mostly in the evenings. It was hard. At this time, my father hunted so as to not die of hunger. Only he knows how Dad could hunt in the darkness of the night. True, he had excellent eyesight. Anyone would have that, so he never returned without prey. Once, he even shot an unknown animal, but no one paid attention to it. Everyone was so hungry that they ate it in one sitting. I only remember that the meat was unusually soft and very tasty, almost white. We then prepared enough firewood for 4 years, if not more, and the clearing turned into a huge spacious field. When the snow melted, we went to uproot this field, on foot, without our father. Father and a horse were then needed on the collective farm. We had to spend the night in a hut, about a kilometer from the field. The nights were short and bright then. We stayed late. I was very tired, since I was the eldest son in the family. I would have turned 16 that year, so I fell asleep instantly. 3 other brothers, 14, 13, and 12 years old, also worked hard, so they slept like logs at night. The youngest of us, he was only 9 years old, mostly stayed in the hut. He lit the stove and cooked dinner. I was almost never outdoors. I was all in the hut, so I slept poorly at night and screamed often. It happened that he would wake us up in the middle of the night and point to the window. He was imagining something. Of course, after spending a day in a carbon-fueled hut, God knows what you might say. And not only at night. In 1948, we didn't have electricity in our village, much less in a remote forest hut. But we didn't pay much attention to this. You never know. But recently, nightmares began to torment him almost every night. In general, he didn't let us sleep, and he was afraid to stay alone in the hut, even during the day. One day in June, my father arrived on horseback and plowed up the uprooted part of the field, which we had to plant with potatoes, brought from nowhere. The smaller ones had to be taken with us. While we were clearing out the rest of the field, he was busy planting potatoes. Lunch was prepared right on the field. My brother became happier, but he still slept poorly at night. I calmed down a little, only when we found a piece of old burlap under the bench, which we used to cover the window at night. So June and half of July passed. The nights got darker, so they began to return to the hut earlier. One night, I woke up from a strange rustling sound. The little one didn't sleep. He hid in the corner of the bed and glanced sideways at the closed window. Someone was walking near the hut. Maybe father has arrived. Our door was locked tightly with a bolt, but it was clearly felt that someone wanted to open it. I shouted to my father, but no one answered me. I did not dare to wake up the other brothers. They were sleeping so soundly and well. I looked out the window for a long time, but couldn't see anything. The next morning, I didn't say anything to anyone, but I also decided to take the little one with me to the cutting area. For some reason, I was afraid to leave him alone in the hut. I don't know why. And I couldn't work at full capacity. I was tormented by doubts. The rustling continued every night, and every night, my brother and I did not sleep. I didn't dare leave the hut, and besides, we didn't have a gun. August came, and the nights, as luck would have it, became long and dark. The work was not going well. One day, at the end of the month, my father arrived. I told him about this, but he just laughed, citing the fact that we were very tired. I barely begged him to leave us the gun and plow the hut from all sides on horseback. My father was, of course, not happy with my quirks, but still complied with the request. The next morning he left, leaving us alone again. Then, however, he came a couple more times, but for firewood for the collective farm. They promised to knock off the norm. It's strange, but the rustling noises stopped. Even the little one began to sleep more peacefully at night, so it calmed down a little. Following our father's example, our neighbors came to the adjacent plot. The hut there had been empty for a long time. During the day, we helped them uproot the forest, and at night, they came to sleep in our hut, since it had long since become leaky, and ours was not only strong, but also spacious. Now there were 9 of us spending the night, so I finally began to sleep peacefully and work better. By the end of August, we managed to repair their hut, and the eldest of them decided to spend the night here for the first time. The other 3 were so used to spending the night with us that they didn't want to leave, and we had more fun with them. He left in the afternoon. The hut was only 6 kilometers away, by village standards, close. But he didn't come to us, either the next day or the day after tomorrow, although he seemed to promise. Having finished our business, the whole gang headed to that hut. When they approached, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The door of the hut was open. Having called a comrade, we, having received no answer, entered the hut. Everything in it was turned upside down. The floorboards were broken. The window was broken. It's strange, but Jaeger's boots and sweatshirt were in place. Not understanding anything, we returned to our hut. I didn't want to stay in that one. I had a bad feeling. The next morning, we came to that hut again, but Jaeger never showed up. His 2 brothers insisted that we all spend the night with them. No matter how much I resisted this, nothing came of it. My conscience also did not allow me to leave them alone. Everyone had to stay. We restored the broken floors, boarded up the window, since the nights were already cold, and bolted the door tightly. Everyone fell asleep quickly. I was the only one who could not sleep a wink. Jaeger's disappearance frightened me. If his father came for him, then why was the hut left in this condition? Why did Jaeger leave his things here? Why then did no one come to our hut for the rest? Maybe a war has started. Jaeger was the oldest of 9 of us. He was 17 years old. In the second half of the night, when everyone was fast asleep, I heard a rustling sound that had long been familiar to me. Someone approached the hut and began to pull on the door. The door was quite flimsy, so I woke up the others, lit the kerosene stove, and picked up a gun, just in case, moving a bench to the door itself and placing a tub of water on top of it. Everyone was already ready and holding axes in their hands. The valve rattled. Soon it burst, and the door began to open, moving the bench towards us. The guys were not at a loss, and the whole crowd fell on her, but nothing worked. The one who was behind the door turned out to be much stronger than them. Soon, a huge hand covered in fur appeared in the doorway. The guys, fortunately, did not notice this and continued to stubbornly move the bench, or rather, the bench continued to gradually move them in the opposite direction. Screaming in surprise, I accidentally knocked over the kerosene stove on the floor. In a matter of minutes, the moss-insulated hut burst into flames. We did not immediately rush to the window. In a state of deep fright, the guys continued to rest their hands on the bench, although, as it seemed to me, there was no one else on the other side, since the door was tightly closed. Jumping out the window, we stood for a long time near the burning hut, afraid to move away from the fire. The horror that had shackled us receded a little only when the first signs of dawn appeared, but even after that, we stood silently at the ashes for a long time, leaning against each other and clutching axes in our hands. Now everything has become clear what happened to Yegor. More precisely, nothing is clear. When it was completely dawn, we silently returned to our hut. No one started working in the field that day. I started building a second latch on the door, and the guys planed a wooden lattice for the window, just in case. We had to try to protect ourselves from this as best as possible. Fortunately, the window in our hut was very small. Even for teenagers like us, it was absolutely impossible to crawl through it, so the lattice, perhaps, would have been an unnecessary detail here. But, I repeat once again, no one dared to go out onto the field that day, and it was simply a shame for us to sit idle. As dusk approached, we were all seized with panic. The guys begged me to at least light the kerosene stove, but I categorically refused, citing the event of the previous night and the subsequent fire. For even greater safety, we decided to take turns sleeping. Fortunately, the hut had a wooden mechanical clock in working order, which allowed us to separate our sleep times. Since there were 6 of us in the hut, not counting 2 who were under 12 years old, they decided to keep the watch in 2 shifts of 3 people. One was located closer to the window. The other 2 were closer to the door, holding a gun and axes at the ready. Maybe it was a stupid and useless thing, but we, frightened by past events, decided to do just that. But the nighttime, oddly enough, passed very calmly. Vigilance gradually weakened, and many were simply sleeping at their posts. I had to constantly wake them up and reprimand them. Then, succumbing to persuasion, I reduced the number of shifts to 2 people, excluding the younger half. The ugliness has become less, but unfortunately, the sentry post at the window is no longer there. Yes, in principle, what you can see there at night in the darkness of the night. During the day, we all worked together in the field. No one went out alone. By the beginning of September, almost half of the clearing had been cleared out. In general, we fulfilled the plan set by our father. Another, already my idea, was rearranging firewood. We spent the whole day moving some of the firewood close to the hut, thus covering it on almost 3 sides. Firstly, the nights became cold, so firewood served as natural insulation, and it was closer to go out for it. Secondly, September has arrived. No special events occurred during the 2 weeks of the vigil. Yegor never showed up, and his father was also gone for a long time. During the day, we worked in the clearing, and in the evenings, we worked on landscaping the hut, little by little turning it into a fortress, fencing it on all 4 sides with a palisade of poles. We were almost there and calmed down, if one event had not happened. One night, I, as expected, kept watch at the door. Around 3 o'clock, everyone was awakened by the deafening roar of gunfire. It seemed that they were shooting almost right next to the hut from several guns. After about 5 minutes, everything went quiet. After some time, steps were heard near the hut, and there was a knock on the door. It was the father, but he came not alone, but with 3 village men, one of whom I recognized as my neighbor. It turned out that one day, 2 local mushroom pickers, having gone far into the forest for milk mushrooms, climbed into the thicket and discovered bloody human bones and torn rags of clothing. One of the mushroom pickers recognized them as Yegor. Without hesitating a minute, they returned to the village and told about what they had seen. The same day, the neighbor, my father, and one of the local foresters went on a horseback to that place. Indeed, the remains belonged to Yegor. Heading to the neighbor's hut, which was no more than 2 kilometers away, they found only ashes. Then the scared-to-death trio turned towards our hut. It got dark. Before reaching the building, some 400 meters, something resembling a huge monkey fell on them from the trees, and in a few seconds tore the horse into pieces. Maddened with fear, the father, the neighbor, and the forester began to shoot at this giant, maddened monster. But, having shot a clip into it, they failed to destroy the animal. It disappeared into the forest. Fortunately, the trio was not injured. True, because of this father's undertaking, Yegor died in August. Now they have lost their only horse, remaining in a remote hut, without ammunition and a means of transportation. For the rest of the night, the father, full of dull anger, staggered around the hut with an empty gun, shaking his fist. Neighbor Ivan, grief-stricken, roared on the floor. Of course, Yegor could not be returned, but it was still necessary to somehow correct the current situation. The same morning, my father and I began to build a potato pit near the hut. Others were nearby. No one dared to let them go on the field alone. The grief-stricken neighbor was lying on the floor of the hut. This is how the first half of September passed. When the hole was ready, we began harvesting potatoes. The harvest exceeded our expectations. Almost 400 buckets grew in the uprooted area. "We won't die of hunger," said my father. There was a week left before the start of the school year. I was already transferred to the 8th and last grade. In our village in those days, they started studying around the 20th of September, or even later. Everyone was busy doing collective farm work, even the teachers. Only, probably, we were the only ones sitting in the hut all this time. They didn't miss us, only because my father and neighbor Ivan worked hard for 4 norms, being held in high esteem, and also on friendly terms with the chairman of the collective farm. But we had to somehow get out to the village. One day, we made up our minds, and before dawn we left the hut, armed with axes and the only, now mine, gun. The road passed, fortunately, without incident, and late in the evening we arrived in the village. The year 1949 arrived. After graduating from school in the summer, I managed to escape to the city, and I went to study to become a turner. Afterwards, I graduated as a welder, and then I got a job. I never returned to my native village. I'll tell you briefly about the events in the village. My brothers, as well as my neighbors, spent the summer of 1949 in that same hut. Yegor was buried humanely. My father was given a new horse on the collective farm for good work. Then he bought a horse, but in the vicinity of the hut, it was still restless. Not everyone slept at night. True, every week, either my father or my neighbor Ivan visited there. My fence was strengthened. The guys were provided with weapons. But, despite this, rustling sounds were heard almost every night, sometimes turning into a roar that made the brothers' blood run cold. In the winter of 1950, the torn bodies of 2 local residents were found in the forest, but the villagers never stopped going into the forest. They somehow needed to feed. In the summer of the same year, electricity was installed in the village. A neighbor's wife gave birth to twins, surpassing our family in the number of children. The clearing was completely plowed, so the family now received almost 700 buckets of potatoes, instead of the previous 400. True, no one from our village dared to follow the example of my father. In 1951, my second brother moved to the city. In 1952, my third, as well as 2 neighbor guys. In 1953, Joseph Stalin died, taxes were abolished, and life in the village improved. Already in 1954, none of the local villagers went hungry. But, despite this, my father did not dare to abandon our forest plot. In 1958, my last brother moved to the city. The plot that had fed us for more than 10 years was abandoned. Never shared this before on here. In Ontario, there is this giant provincial park called the Torrens Barrens, southernmost glacial moraine in the country and an area spiritually important to the local natives. I camped there a lot over the years. Never got any bad vibes or weird experiences. Spring of 2016, drinking with a couple friends. Look up weather. Says it'll be a mild -15 over the weekend, so we decide to go camping. Haha, it's Friday the 13th today. Isn't that spooky? Drive out there, uneventful. Arrive about 4 p.m. Pop up the truck camper, gather wood, get a fire going, drink some beer, play music, the regular stuff. Around 9 p.m, the dogs start acting funny, growling at the woods, running off towards the tree line, barking, but never exiting the clearing that we were parked in. Suddenly, the temperature drops. Not a few degrees as the sun goes down, but at least 20 degrees down. My windshield washing fluid froze, even though the current weather report said that we were still at -15. Fire won't stay lit. I am basically constantly throwing brush, kindling, paper, anything I have on it to keep it lit. The paper won't even light. There's no wind. I don't know if this next part's related, but it stuck out to me. 11 p.m. The silver crossover shows up. Some people get out, surprised we're there. Ask them what they're doing. They say they came to look at the stars. They don't seem fazed by the cold, and they walk off straight into the woods. Go back to trying to keep my fire alive, one dog diligently by my side, occasionally growling at the woods. Other dog retreated to the camper. 12 p.m. Another silver crossover appears, the exact same car as the first one. Pulls in next to the first, kinda creeped out. They get out. Don't say anything to me. Don't even say a word to each other. Just walk into the woods where the first group did. 1 a.m. My girlfriend comes out of the camper. Says she's scared. Wants to go stay at a hotel or something. Any excuse is good for me. Drop the tent. A bend in the camp. Tear off down the road back to civilization as fast as the conditions allowed. As soon as we leave the dark sky preserve, temperature goes back to where it should have been the whole time. Not going back anyways. Get to motel. Wake up the watchman to check in. Even the dogs. Go to the room. Pass out in bed. And then I dreamed. I was walking through the woods, but I was shorter than I am. Much shorter. Dog height. I didn't move my limbs in my dream. It was like I was just piggybacking something else. I watched myself at my fire in the woods, trying to keep it alive. I watched myself and the dogs getting spooked, and I watched myself drive away. After the truck leaves, I follow it. Somehow I can keep up easily, and I stay well behind it, all the way to town. I arrive at the motel after the truck, after they've all gone inside, and I go to the back. I open the door. Don't know how. I couldn't see any part of what I was in the dream. Like a ghost, I move inside, past the sleeping watchman. I follow the trail I walked awake, through the twisting halls, without hesitation, arriving at the door of the room that I was inside, sleeping. Right as I approach the door in the dream, I wake up in real life, from the dogs going crazy, and barking/growling at the door. I jump up, kinda freaked out by the dream, and look at the people. Nothing. Next day, I asked the watchman. He heard the door open once after we checked in, but thought we were grabbing baggage. We returned to the camp, which was untouched, broke it down, and hauled ass out of there, well before the sun went down again. The Dark Sky Preserve is the largest area in southern Canada without any electricity, artificial lights, or traces of civilization beyond trail markers, and it was once a burial site. I don't know what that dream was, or what happened that night. Cold feet. Going to keep details on this vague, since the place is still owned by family, but I'd still like some input on what I might have experienced. First time posting here, so excuse me if I'm doing green text wrong. Be young teen, late 90s, winter getaway trip in northern Canada. Uncle's hunting cabin with a small lake right next to it, idyllic as fuck. Middle of the afternoon, overcast, but no rain or snow that day. Dad chopping wood on the shoreline. Cousins and uncle are dicking around in the woods and shooting at beer bottles. Was kind of a pussy back then who didn't like guns, just happy being in the wilderness. Decided to try ice fishing for the first time. Lake is within sight of my family, so they didn't care if I went alone, and ice is thick enough to stand on with a couple of centimeters of powdered snow. Wander out and bust a hole in the ice. Takes a while because I was a weak bitch of a kid back then. Sitting on the tackle box because I didn't want to go back to the cabin for a stool and start fishing with pieces of stale sandwich ham for bait. Keep hearing a quiet slapping noise by where I'm sitting while getting my line ready. Think it's just water lapping at the ice underneath me. See something white-grey pass by the hole a few times. Probably just trout. The line bobs every few minutes, and whenever I pull it out, the ham is gone. Sat there in the bitching cold for an hour. Don't land a single fish. Get really bored and uncomfortable because I'm hunched on a fucking tackle box. Scrape some of the snow off the ice to see if I can spot any fish. See bottoms of bare feet on the other side of the ice for a couple of seconds before they step away from the cleared patch. What the fuck? Looked like another person walking upside down underneath the ice. Yell for my family to come over, but they've gone into the cabin already and don't hear me. More curious than scared for some reason. Dumb kid brain thinks that someone is messing with me. Took off one of my coats and used it to sweep more snow away. Find the feet again, and they step away under snow-covered ice, just like before. Could see legs too, but not much else. Water is too dark, and ice is too thick to see anything above the knee. Keep walking forward with the coat, using it kind of like a broom to sweep snow away in a path. Every time I find the feet, they move further away from the shoreline toward the middle of the lake. Followed the feet for another 10 meters and suddenly hear and feel a deep creaking, cracking sound. Realize that the ice is a lot thinner here than by the shore. 180 and power walk back to my gear, keeping as far away from the fishing hole as I can. While retreating back to shore, I could hear a dim slapping noise following me the entire way back. Bitched my family out for leaving me alone when I get back to the cabin. Dad and uncle said they could see me through the cabin window just fine. Tell them about what I saw. Cousins all think I'm full of shit and just trying to get back at them for leaving me alone, and they start telling ghost stories for the rest of the night to freak me out more. Didn't go near the lake for the rest of the trip. I've heard some Inuit stories of monsters pulling kids under the ice, but we weren't that far north, and this thing had ample opportunity to reach up through the hole to get me, though maybe it was content to eat my ham instead. Swift delivery. 2020. It's the beginning of May. I am still a cop on the streets of capital city in Slavic country, East European. COVID-19 did not hit hard yet at this point, but our country still got real totalitarian regime-style regulations. The masks, the curfew, the shops closing, etc. I am police, so I am the necessary tool for the implementation of the regulations. While we were the imperial soldiers, rounding up the innocent with the guilty, our commanding officers and politicians were messiahs, the real saviors of the poor. They went to battle facing death, with their chin held high, calm as you please. One order from them, and us mortals on the front line would move like pawns across a chessboard to our grisly fates. Whatever, man, that MP4. At least I got a job in today's economy. The day is 12th of May, 2020, and I remember this exactly because my stepfather died at this exact day a month ago because of COVID-19. He had Parkinson's. Get to the station after a 2-week leave of absence, and I'm still a little shaken up, but don't let it show. I am stationed with a guy straight from police school. Turns out he was in the army before, and is a pretty okay guy. It is 8:10 a.m., 10 minutes into the shift, and we get called to some remote forest area where some guy can't get in touch with his friend. Get there. We are in an area where you can't get with a car, about 2 kilometers inside forest area. We walk this forest path for a while. Don't know if we are getting to him. Get the feeling we are. There is a fork in the road, and some guy stands at the fork. Cross between a hobo and a normal guy. You called? Yeah, it's my friend. Haven't seen him for a month, so I decide to check him out, and well, he's dead. He takes sip out of plastic beer bottle he has on him. The guy is actually pretty shaken up, but decides to lead us to the dead guy anyway. We lived together in the forest, but I moved out a few months ago. Hobos again. We go a while off path in forest, then he stops going and points into the forest. We could smell the guy, some good 100 meters from where he was. Sorry, I wait here. Already saw it. Gulp. Seen some dead bodies before, but this had to be the second worst. The guy was inside the tent, obviously. There were bugs everywhere. Really don't want to, but start to open the tent. Bugs fly out. Close the tent. We guard the perimeter and call criminalistics. As usual, wait for some 2 hours for these guys to get there. Then we wait for coroner. Coroner is actually a cute girl, about my age. Sometimes the job chooses you, I guess. Coroner needs to get the guy out of the tent. Minute of silence. It will probably be easier to cut the tent off him, I say. Everyone agrees, and we start to cut off the tent. First the stench, then bugs fly out. The guy is rotten in some places, already black with rot. Still somehow in one piece, and not bloated, but nature has been reclaiming the man for a while. Coroner examines the guy quite thoughtfully, turns him around, gags a few times, but does a good job. No external causes of death, cause of death unknown, estimated time of death. She starts to look around. There are some packages of spread food open around. According to the look of the body and these packages, I would say a month ago, around 12th of the 4th, 2020. What are the odds, DXA? Stand there white as a sheet, the rest of the time. Have to wait there for another 2 hours until undertaking comes. Still makes me think sometimes it could be coincidence. But still, why that exact same date? That meant he died the same day as my stepfather. If she was guessing anyway, why that exact same number?